Hi Pradyumna, welcome to the CTQ Smartcast.
Hi, Harish. Thanks for having me here.
Yeah. So first question is going to be a tricky one for me, an interesting one for me. But I think this is the first introductory ball that you play every time you answer questions, right? So how do you really define a growth focused outsourced CFO partner, and how is it different from any other CFO advisory services or internal CFO? How is it different?
Sure. So I think one of the biggest changes that we, as let's say India, and our approach to finance that probably the West has adopted a lot better is how you look at the role of a CFO, right? So most of the time when you think about finance or you think about a CFO, you're thinking about control, right?
Right.
You're thinking about risk and measures, but what really the role of a CFO is about management, right? Like what management really means is given a set of constraints, given a set of boundaries, what's the best that you can do, or what can you help achieve, right? Which is a more critical aspect of the role that a CFO plays. In the West, the lot of credibility has been given to the role of a CFO and how they can become partners to the CEO, right? Or many of the CFOs, including the current CEO of Uber, were CFOs in their earlier life, right? Like how can they look at the constraints and see what's the best way or most optimal way to deploy assets and really take them. So one of the changes that at least when I describe myself is, I use the word growth because growth is a very important part of a CFO's role. But we tend to think, at least in India, even I used to think, when I was back when in KPMG, that the role of a CFO is as a guardian, right? Like somebody who's managing a lot less than what I know today. But the thing is that we as individuals and we as founders, I'm again bucketing myself as a founder because it's convenient right now, but we as founders also need somebody to kind of play that role of being a partner with us, who's also looking at guardrails, who's also looking at measurements, who's looking at effectiveness. And end of the day, that's what will lead to growth, right? Like given the capital constraint, given the asset constraints, given the talent constraints, how do we do more? So that's kind of the role that I play for most of the organizations that we work with, is how do you get more out of what you have?
Right. Yeah. And usually, is this in organizations where there is already an existing CFO? So do you augment that person, in terms of maturity, capability, or is it where you're actually playing the de facto CFO because they don't have an internal CFO?
Yeah, so that's a great question. Usually even the people who join us kind of find it very difficult to understand that why, though we have the word CFO in our name, why we have a lot of client-facing members or CFOs themselves. But the idea is that with a CFO partner, right, what you're looking at is somebody to augment capabilities of the CFO itself and the existing team, because they are always playing a catch-up role, right? Like if you look at any organization which is in that spurt of growth, they're not there yet, and they will never be, right? They're always trying to build capabilities. They're always trying to respond to changes. They're trying to work with many investors. We become very easy plugins for them because we're very focused on certain outcomes, certain measurements, certain initiatives, and it becomes somebody that they can rely on and take them through that journey. So a lot of the organizations that we work with, actually CFOs are a large part of our client base, right? But we become somewhere in terms of a sounding board for them, as well as the CEO, where the CEO can say, hey, run this simulation from me, or run this exercise for me, which would be too taxing on the internal equipment or internal machinery in the organization. So we come in and provide that flexibility. So to answer that question, large part is companies that have CFOs already. But again, groups of companies or groups of organizations, where we have, for example, a very large internet publishing group. And there, the role that we play is a lot more in line with what the CEO wants out of the entire group and not necessarily with each team, right? So we somewhere fit in directly as an assisting hand for him rather than with each of the individual enterprises.
Right. Yeah. And is there any specific say point in life cycle of the company or a company size where engaging with you sort of makes sense? What is the right, what is the sweet spot for you that you want to be in?
So when, I mean, the calling card for us as an organization or us as a firm or us as individuals is complexity, right? So the second there is a circumstance which requires you to think beyond your comfort zone, right? It could be, for example, adding a new vertical. Now that's very stressing on somebody who's not done it earlier. On what do I expect from this vertical? What should be my cost benefit analysis? What should be my expected outcomes from doing it? Right. So it can be as early as we work with organizations where they had nothing except for a PowerPoint presentation, and we work with organizations that are publicly listed companies as well. But between all of them, what they really look for from somebody like us is a partner who can do all of these things very flexibly, very scalably, and also bring in a little bit, the additional independent element into the exercise. So the stage does not really matter, but we insist that it has to be in certain stages of an organization's journey, simply because the expectations can be more easily managed or more easily governed, right? So for example, in your 0 to 1 stage, there's a lot of things that are happening within your organization where the product is the primary focus, right? So somebody like us might be actually an overkill, right? We might be trying to bring in too much when actually all you need to do is sit down and grind, right? But when it starts hitting that 1 to 10 is when you need to put up measurement systems, where you need to put up general overall operating systems, and there we get a way to partner with them. Or if it's in the 10 to 100, then how are they looking at the business, right? How can it be made more efficient? How can it be made more effective? And that journey follows all the way down its own line. And then if they're a listed company, they again need us for very specific initiatives, right? Like, tell me, should I enter India? If I have to enter India, what should be my expectation? What can be my pricing model? So there it becomes a lot more focused around specific initiatives. But each of the cases, the role that we play can be very wide or it can be very narrow. It depends purely on what the organization needs at that point of time.
Right. Yeah, I can draw a lot of parallels with how we work, because we work with companies with 6 people in the team to large listed Fortune 50
Right,
companies, right? On the culture front, obviously, yes, every great company should have everything sorted on culture right from day one, but that's not going
right,
to happen, right? There is
right,
going to be some culture that they will incur, but you need to know what is the point of no return. There are points of inflection, like when the companies are ready to scale 50 employees plus, and that is a time when they absolutely need to have articulated their culture. In a larger
right.
company which has already created their culture document and all, it is about bringing that culture to life. So I can very nicely sort of draw parallels with what you guys are doing. We're doing it on the culture side, you guys are doing it on the finance side. Before I
Yeah, and
go, sorry,
right.
yeah, go ahead.
No, just to add, right? I mean, like what you said, I see a lot of parallels when you say it too, right?
Yeah.
So, for example, the first 20 employees, the culture is in practice,
Yeah,
right? Beyond 20 employees, the culture is defined,
correct.
because that you have to have it in such a way that it is scalable, right? It might
Right,
come in from systems, might come in from
right,
operations, processes, or how you deal with people or individuals itself.
correct.
But let's say the 101st employee, he still has to be able to gel with the same culture that comes in, which is the role that you guys play, right? Which for us is also similar to what we do. The 101th client should still feel like he's part of the first 100 clients that came in.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's very nicely put. But before we go ahead, I had one question which I wanted to get out of the way. So, what is the story behind the name Prequate?
Sure. So Prequate is portmanteau for pre and equate. So equate
Okay,
is usually a post facto event, right? Given the set of the like equation days, right? So
right.
you have your LHS and your RHS kind of defined.
Hmm.
What we really want to focus on, or we've always kind of tried to lay the foundation toward part two, is can you do that equation much before that event occurs? Right? So which is planning, essentially how you plan, how you execute, how do you look at what you want to be able to achieve. So that's really the meaning of the word Prequate. A lot of people don't get it. I mean, they think it's so pre-equate, but there's really a lot of reason. As founders will always have a lot of backstory to how they came up with the name. So
Yeah. So coming to founders, right? And I think that's a great question to sort of get deeper into, your work as well. So how can founders use finance to identify operational, blind spots? Because we sort of assume that the CEO should have this, overall lens and is building, incorporating the finance view. But a lot of times it is not. Sometimes it is gut feel, sometimes it's more attachment to the way they see the world, but the finance lens is more of an afterthought. So what do you say about this, and how do you help founders here?
So, see, if you really, scrape everything off, right? All the bells and whistles of running an organization, the business model, the idea, everything. The only true objective that remains is the numbers, right? Like, so, you can say you've had a good year. I can say you've had an okay year, but the only objective measure is, okay, did you make 10 million in revenue, right? So that number does not change irrespective of who looks at it. And most of the time when founders look at an organization or their approach to finance is usually driven by the standard set things like the income statement or profit and loss account or balance sheet and cash flow statements. They're just prescriptions, right? The government has prescribed a way in which you put in information so that that information can be filed with a registrar, could be given to an MCA, or it can be given to the income tax department or whosoever, right? It just sets a standard way in which you talk about numbers. But really, that's not what the business is all about. That's not what finance is about. Finance is all those measurements and tiny little numbers and metrics that really make that number what that number looks like, right? So if you look at a balance sheet, there are 100 odd metrics that you can really draw from a balance sheet, right? Now, a lot of them can be relevant, a lot of them can be irrelevant to where you are as an organization, and irrelevant as in maybe some other day I need to put it on my watch window and then figure things out. But if you need to really understand what that number means and have a specific course of action that is defined by those numbers, you need to be able to do a root cause analysis using those numbers. Now, I don't see an organization being able to do a root cause analysis by purely looking at the income statement. Right? It's a post-mortem analysis report of what really happened or how that murder occurred, right? But if you really need to get in, you have to look at all the tiny metrics that actually lead to you making a loss or making the profit, and then look back at how those numbers depend on a lot of other operating decisions that you have taken. If you really get into finance and adopt finance, most of the great founders have a very good grip on unit metrics, right? So if you look at one standard thing that they all have, they have numbers on the top of their mind. They don't have what is your balance sheet total, right? That's not what we're talking about. They have what is important to be measured, and they have that number in their mind at all points of time because they're always trying to draw, what did I do with that number last month? What did I do with that number this month? What am I doing next month? Right? And that is what you call as a good governance or a good founder, right? Like in the way or in the approach in which he thinks, because he can say that we've had a fantastic year, but if he feels that we've underperformed by 50%, he's not going to say that. He's not going to say we've had a great year, right? Irrespective of whether it looks great or not from the outside. So it's a very subjective measure. But when you start looking at it, it gives you a decision that maybe your pricing was off, right? Or maybe your conversion numbers were off, or maybe your user cohorts are not behaving the way they were, you expected them to behave, or maybe the stickiness with which you set up the entire model for how your business is going to grow is not something that you're able to achieve, right? So it gives you a decision that you need to be able to take. So founders, when they have a lens of finance, they can make very quick, simple decisions that actually translate down into numbers at the end of the year, but more importantly, to metrics that they can understand and identify at this point of time, right? If you don't do it, what happens is you're always looking at it from a catch-up, right? Oh, I should have done this, right? If you look at it 1 year in, it's redundant. If you look at it 1 month in, you're like, oh, I should have done this last month, but then you don't know what you're looking at, right? If you have just these, for example, your P&L and balance sheet, and those are throwing out numbers, you don't know what to do. You just know that number exists.
Right. Yeah. And you spoke about metrics and different kinds of metrics. One really heartening thing is to actually listen to all these metrics from a finance guy, right? Because you are actually talking about the kind of things that business owners really appreciate and want to understand. And again, it's not about those, the compliance regulatory requirements of P&L and balance sheet. That
Right.
yes, I know I need to submit it somewhere, but that is not what I'm looking for, right? I'm looking for things like these. So it's great to hear that. I'm sure founders who listen to you must be really happy, feeling happy that yeah, now we have a finance guy who's actually talking in our language. But extending that further, so what are these quantitative and sometimes qualitative measures that founders should use to do a health check internally, that yeah, I'm going on the right track? How do you sort of help them identify these measures, and how easy or difficult are they to measure and track on a continuous basis? And if you can give some concrete examples from different industries, domains, that will make this even more tangible.
Right. Okay. So if you look at it from a purely the metrics lens, right? Like every organization has those qualitative metrics and those quantitative metrics. Now, the qualitative metrics and quantitative metrics by themselves might not mean much, but the second they're kind of combined together, they weave a story, right? They
Correct.
weave a very nice tale about what happened within the organization. Now, let's say NPS, right? Like though it's expressed as a quantitative measure, it's really qualitative measure, or it's a qualitative score of how your user cohorts are behaving, or how your user numbers are, are they healthy or not, right? So, for example, when we were working with one ed tech company, retention rates obviously are extremely important, right? But when you're going on a spree to acquire customers, your CLTV is also very important, because if you're going to do anything to extend the user journey, to add more products, to add more use cases, or to say that I want to be upselling a certain program, right? Or I want to be able to reduce the price. Now, CAC by itself is not a good enough lens. So you need to have a way in which you identify and measure CAC in its relative terms to the CLTV, right? So if I'm going to take, let's say I'm going to give a discount on a bulkier package, right? That should really translate into me having a lower CAC, and lower CAC coming from lower conversion, or sorry, higher conversion, right? So unless you have this whole story nicely played out, your NPS numbers will not look healthy, because your NPS is obviously coming in from something that happened, or the events that happened within the organization at that point of time. So this is one example, right? If you look at another example of, let's say, for example, an FMCG company that we work with, right? Multiple SKUs, products across multiple shelves. But when you run a pure analysis of what the gross margin rate is at a per product level, it doesn't make sense, right? Because there are some products which are loss making, but why do I need it? But when you actually relate it to the emotional angle, right? So when you do a customer survey, and then you say, what is the most visible product according to you in your shelf, the product that they have a gross margin which is almost at a negative level is a product which matches the product that you see in most kitchens, right? So it can be, for example, Tata is really valuable and really trusted by Indian consumers throughout the world. But if you look at Tata Salt, it might not make a lot of money by itself, but every household identifies Tata Salt and purity, right? So you have to look at it from a qualitative lens as well. And when you say gross margin, I'm making a loss on a certain product, am I able to use it to sell through a different product, right? Am I able to use trust to sell through a different product? Does it impact on my conversion rates for a new product, or my sales and marketing spends on a new product? And that's what really, from a finance perspective, you have to be able to bring the language of, this is the journey that a particular user or particular product takes. And that product has the ability to carry other products into a household. And hence I want to be able to study them together or collective, and not as individual products itself. So this way, each business is very different. Since a lot of work that we do, obviously considering that we are in Bangalore, is on tech finance, right? A lot of it goes into the intangibles, right? So for example, if you look at CLTV, now CLTV is in the process of building, right? You don't have your actual predictable CLTV till 3-4 years of, for example, a customer or a client's relationship with you. But you can make a very predictive guess about it using the kind of activation rate that they have, right? So for example, if he's a DAU and he's an MAU, is he likely to stick on for longer, right? If he's just featuring in my MAU, I always am at a risk that he's going to drop out because he's not using it as aggressively as I want him to, right? Or the number of users per account, right? So each of these metrics by themselves have a small story to say, but they reflect very heavily on some of the other master metrics like CLTV has, right? Like, or CAC recovery has. And these have to be looked at from a lens, like another company that we work with, which had a premium product, right? So in a freemium model, these guys come into the funnel. They spend some time, you spend a lot of time educating them. You make these video walkthroughs, and you put in a lot of effort, a lot of capital into really establishing the systems that are going to be important to convert them into a paid customer. But if you're not able to convert them into a paid customer, then your whole business model is at risk, right? Irrespective of how much you build, spent on acquiring that customer. So if they did not fix this, then they're not going to be able to establish a good CLTV, because the CLTV will get averaged out by all the accounts that you have added, and then somewhere you're going to pay the price on the valuation side, right? So the way you look at it is all these metrics are correlated, but as you follow one metric back, then you start seeing, hey, I need to work on activation, right? Like I need to get that guy, from an MAU to DAU, right? And that's going to be my focus, rather than my LTV is low, or it's high, or it's dropping, or whatever it is. You have to go all the way back, because the fundamental business is built on those concepts.
Right. Yeah. I think as Ashwath Damodaran says, it has to be both the story and the numbers. You can't take only one, at your convenience.
Right.
Yeah. So, you mentioned Bangalore and tech startups. So one question that came to mind is, when do companies sort of, we spoke about when you think is the right time for you to, get in. But what is happening on the ground? When are companies and founders bringing you in? Is it the investors who are bringing you in? Has that been the case? And what is the real value that companies, whether they are investors or the founding teams, are looking from a CFO partner to deliver? Right? Is there a worry of okay, these people are going to come and bring in a lot more order to the chaos that defines a startup? Is that a worry? Can you talk through that? I know multiple questions, baked into one, but yeah.
Right. So, I think most of the time, I think the founders and the investors have similar agendas, right? Like what they want out of it. There probably are some additional agenda points for an investor that probably a founder might not have or might not see today. But together, what they want to run is a really efficient or successful business that's capable of adding a lot of enterprise value, right? So that's foundationally what they want. Now, investors, to some extent, I would say to a large extent, good accounts that we work with, large accounts that we work with, are investor introductions, right? And they bring us in and say that, hey, here's an agile or flexible way in order for you to add some capability, right? And then we, come inside and say, identify, we can do this bit for you, we can do that bit for you, and then start off the relationship. But as we kind of keep going down that valley, the work that we do kind of matures with every business or with every organization, because initially it will be very initiative driven. Later on, it becomes that kind of like a glue, like an ether within them, right? So you need to do anything within that whole range. They say, oh, let me call on these guys, or let me call these guys. Can they execute it for us? Okay. Typically, the place at which we enter a relationship is when they have raised Series A, right? If you have to say from a funding perspective. Correct. So the second they are about to raise or they have raised is when they have a real important need for somebody like us to come on board, because there is a huge gap in capabilities, right? So, in the pre-Series A stage, they're still figuring out things, right? They're still experimenting with things. But the second they hit Series A, somebody is giving them capital, which is like an injection, right? Now, when you have that capital, you can either be very, very prudent with it, which is also not very good, or you can be extremely, optimistic about the way things are and then run out of runway, right? You don't want either case. Now, what we come in to do is, if every decision that you had a cost benefit analysis, had an ROI mindset, what could you do? Right? So it just bounces things off, becomes a lot easier when you have somebody who brings in, experiences from outside of this, of the organization that you're with, just as a validation, and two, as some way of measuring and some way of putting guardrails, because we can flag off things very independently that they sometimes might not even have thought of, right? But the second we come in and say, hey, this is a risk area that you're not looking at, or this is a metric that you really need to focus on, right? Like if we say, okay, you're doing well, you're getting a lot of customers, but we see that in the 7th or 8th month, you're having a churn, right? Like from a cohort. Now, when they look at it, they say, oh, that's an eventual life cycle, right? What I'm looking to do is, can it be 9th month, right? What can we do differently in the 7th month to get it to 9th month? Now, these are realizations that actually they would have had they had enough bandwidth or time to be able to spend on, doing these deep dives, which somebody else is doing for you on the backboard, right? You're just focusing on things that are important, right? So that way, for us, I think the first time an investor kind of participates or comes in, we've come in early as seed. We've stayed, I think, Series F. We've done even some companies which, after IPO, and we've worked with organizations like that as well. But typically, it's in this range. Right? And most of the time, after Series F or G or H or any of the alphabets, if they want a skill set like ours, the first thing that they do is they call us up and say, can we acquire? Right? Obviously, they have the money and they can buy a team like ours. And if it's not us, then they will get somebody who's done this role for them several times over, or maybe in another organization. But it's like having $1 million or $2 million available to you to just spend on getting a team on board, which a very, very large organization can do. Right? But $2 million when you have $5 million in your bank is not worth it.
Correct. Right. Yeah. And again, a follow-up question on that. So, how does your sort of sales cycle work then? What are your insights into how your customer acquisition channels are working?
So most of it, I mean, I would say it's fortunate till some stage, but it's unfortunate at some point, right? Like the fortunate part is, I think a lot of the work that we get is from referrals. So a lot of people do, inquire that whether we can work with them, participate with them, or do some bits for their organization. And most of these are, either investor based connects, or sometimes a portfolio company that we have worked with makes a recommendation to another founder. Right. And since it's something very specific to them as a business, and it works completely with them and the team, again, is heavily jumbled, right? And one thing that we as professionals do is we have a way, like you want any data about any company that works with us, you don't get it, right? Simple, right? And at the same time, the experts that we consult, even though they're from the same business, the experts that we consult on both of them are very different. Right? So I can have one expert who's working with me on let's say one micromobility startup, and I can have a completely different expert on another micromobility startup just because the business model is different. Right. So that way you are able to trust that one organization will be able to fill that vacuum for multiple such founders. And that's also the curse of consulting, right? That you have to kind of rely on that to be the primary channel. But we have started seeing that spending a lot of time and energy on content and thought leadership, that's also providing a lot of trickle down benefits. And not even if not directly, I would say indirectly, like all the alma mater organizations that I would work with. They also say, hey, I've been following you guys. I saw this thought leadership thing, or I saw this white paper. It's very interesting. Do you guys want to come down and have a chat with us? Right. So, but again, it's luck, right? A large part of it is luck, which is what we're trying to shake off. We're trying to be more organized and try to create a process out of it. Simply because you have to be able to operate in a lean fashion, right? You don't want to set up a 10-member sales team for a consulting company unless and until it's a very large consulting company that works on those kind of projects. But I would say 2 to 3 months is the amount of time that it requires from the first connection to us actually working. If it's urgent, it's as short as like we've got clients, we've got a call in the morning, and that evening we finalized and started working on it. But it's very specific, like get me a valuation that I can use to discuss with an investor or a potential a strategic partner, right? So the urgency that they have, and whether or not you have the ability to fulfill it, and the trust plays a larger role. So I would not say it's a typical sales cycle compared to most of the other, larger enterprise sales business models. But it will be more focused and more specific to the use cases.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Again, I can see so many parallels with what we do. The way you have, articulated this, I think you could have just, said that
So
I'm
sold
speaking
for
about
you.
CTQ. And all of that would have been true, right? So, yeah, yeah. So I was really intrigued by this line on your LinkedIn, profile, which said, "Good businesses are built with good people. Great businesses are built with good people armed with great systems." So let's just dissect this. What do you mean by this, and where is it that people lack in terms of building these great systems? Is it intent? Is it capability? Is it ability to actually follow those great systems? Where is it that people go wrong?
Right. So if you look at, if you really go down to dissect, I'll just borrow something that we were talking about just a few seconds back. You're 0 to 1 phase, right? All that matters is a great founding team. Like how you're able to get a product out, how you're able to get your MVP out. That's what establishes whether or not you have a business to start off with, right? And then 1 to 10 stage, your early team members are your champions. They're going to further the cause. They're working on getting, all the bits that require validation, or the hypothesis that you have about the market. They're looking to, establish all of those things. Now, if you don't set up great systems at that point of time, it'll only be born to be a 0 to 1 company, right? And then from a 1 to 10 company, you will barely make it, but the cracks will start showing when somebody puts in the money and says, take it to 100, right? So you'll have a great organization till it's 10, but from 10 to 100, you have to work backwards and say, oh, we've made big mistakes. Right? But the guys who have built successful businesses, at least at the 10 to 100, are the guys who started putting in these systems at the 1 to 10 stage, right? Like they started saying, oh, this is how you measure success, right? Or this is how you measure a failure, right? Or for example, if there is a growth experiment that I want to run, right? Then this is what I expect as an outcome from this, right? Unless and until they're doing this as a practice, it loses its cause along the way. And then you end up doing way too much because you have a number of people, you have a number of cogs that are all operating simultaneously. And unless you have that already built, it's all going to go downhill, right? Because you're going to do everything inefficiently. And when you do everything inefficiently, your runway is always a problem. You're always raising capital, which means your founder is continuously doing the task of going and selling the organization as compared to selling the product, right? Which is a very difficult cycle to kind of get out of. But all of these guys have intent, right? No founder will say that I do not want great systems to exist in an organization. But when it comes to prioritization, right? Like if I have to prioritize between growth and if I have to prioritize between systems, if I do not have the equipment or access to machinery or access to talent or people or know-how, then I'm going to be left with me making choices purely on growth. And growth is a choice that is easy to make, right? Because that's what I do. Bread and butter. I know how to sell the organization. I know how to sell the product, right? So when it comes to these are difficult decisions for them to make, and they will tend to, like we all do, if it's something that's too complex or too hard or it requires us to learn a new skill, we put it aside and say, at the right time, I will get back to it, right? So I think everybody has intent, but when it comes to really deploying or working to deploy it, what they require is somebody who they can trust on and say that, okay, it could be an internal person within the organization itself who's going to say, I'm the champion of this initiative or this goal, or it could be an external agency, right? Like, we get called, the Big Four gets called, a lot of organizations get called to come and, put up systems. But if they have access to something like this, they would do it. Again, provided that they also have the buy-in to make that system work for them, right? And if there's no buy-in, they're looking at, one of the early days, the mistake that we used to make, coming out of the Big Four is also that, we used to take these really heavy, massive presentations, right? And go to the client and then say, this is how it needs to work, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to force fit a process that worked for somebody else and say, this is best practice, right? It's not right fit. It's fit, right? Like for your industry, it's a good fit. But when you come down to the next step of, what will ensure that they're able to maintain their leanness or they're able to maintain that speed at which they operate, is that you tailor it so that you give them, the guardrails within which to operate. but then they're free to use it and not have it hamper the speed at which they respond. So I think that's one of the key things, that a great system to a system. That's one of the big differences, is how responsive is it to where you are as an organization and to your needs itself.
Right. And how do you introduce that sense of urgency? Like you said, people have great intent, but they want to do it at the right time. When I'm really ready for this, right? How do you introduce that sense of urgency that yes, you know that it needs to be done, but it needs to be done now? How do you do that?
Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a business secret, right?
Sure.
Now, a large part of the relationship building that we do, right, is getting to the stage that founders can rely on you for anything, right? Irrespective of the complexity, at 10 in the night, 11 in the night, text me if you have something, right? And when you get that buy-in from a founder or from an investor or a board member or anything like that, they tend to trust you and take your feel on whether or not they should do something about a particular system, right? So it's not about you selling a package or you selling a service or you trying to push something down. It just has to be a natural growth of the relationship itself, that I'm going to also do these processes for you, right? Or maybe we to a large part, we don't do pure risk advisory, pure play risk advisory, setup or any of that, because we say, if you can do it efficiently with somebody else, don't do it with me, right? I'm honestly interested in how you do as an organization and what goals you're able to hit, because I'm here for the long run, right? You might have auditors, you might have consultants, they will keep churning, they will keep doing whatever is there. But if your processes need to be built to suit, then let me be the point of contact that ensures that it happens for you. Now, that urgency can only come if they have that buy-in or the trust from you, right? And a large part of the tech founders, when they, just like the way you guys are having a conversation with me, and I don't know, but if you see, for example, a marked difference between me and another finance professional that you spoke with, right? You say, okay, maybe this guy gets business, right? Or maybe this guy understands what I really need to do at this point of time. And they open up, right? And say that, is this a process? And if you say this is a priority for you now, then it's a measure, it's finally a decision of, can I afford to make this work or not? And if I can afford to make it, then I should just go ahead with it, right? It's not a question of should I be spending this much time and energy, because when you have somebody to rely on, they're going to do it for you, right? Like if you have one neck to catch, right? Like for example, no better way to put it, but let's say you have my neck to catch if the process doesn't work out the way it's supposed to work out, right? And you've done everything as an organization to make it work. Then you can always come back and say it's not working, and right, somebody like us will fix it for you, right? They will help solve the situation rather than say that you should be spending more time on something like this, right? This is typically what the problem what problem most of these founders have, which is that I don't have enough time to respond to things. Like I'm having a hard time trying to catch up with things that are happening on the business side. I can't sit and focus my attention on something that's operational, or that's something that's not an immediate priority for me. So I guess that is important to kind of do with any client or any any relationship that we have, is at the stage that they feel comfortable, which is we've at least noticed it's fairly easy once you start getting into the first month or 45 days into it. When they see that you're very different from anybody that they've interacted with, it becomes easier or a lot more comfortable for them to kind of rely on you. And that's when you need to be able to introduce urgency. But from the outside, urgency is only sales push, which these guys don't have time for, and they're going to drop it.
Right. Yeah. I think this is becoming more and more eerie actually as we go along, because this is like me talking about myself, right? So the next question that I had, Pradyumna, was it's an interesting one, because this is something which we are seeing in a slightly different context as well. So the question that I wanted to ask was, based on your experience with a variety of businesses, what should founders know on day zero? And the lens that I want to add here is that, given our work around culture, and I'm sure that is something which you also probably are seeing around systems, is that a seasoned founder has a different take, because they've gone through the cycle once. They know, that these are the kind of things that I should not be delaying, too far. Do you see that, and do you see that difference between a first-time founder and a slightly seasoned founder? And what are the things that the first-time founder should really know? Either and should not be after having made mistakes, right?
Right.
What are the things that they should know from day zero?
See, one good thing that I find about the, the overachiever founders, right, is that they have a very less hesitance. Right?
Correct.
They're more open to give a new relationship a try
Hmm.
if they find an intellectual match. Right? If they don't find an intellectual match, write it off.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's not going to happen. They will probably not respond to you. But the second you're able to trust somebody to the level that okay, there is potentially a way for this person to add value, now they're happy to trust that guy and give them the responsibility or give them charge of an initiative itself. And they are very happy to also participate with you on what those outcomes are, right? But they don't micromanage, right? At the same time, they're not coming down of what happened this week, right? What happened next week. There are guys who say, this is the outcome that we have. We have 3 months. Give me the way in which you're going to establish ROI on what you're doing or what you're thinking about. Right? And they want to participate in that ROI setting and that the KPI or OKR setting, even though we are somebody on the outside, they want to include us into that process, which is what I think great founders do very well. And if you have the ability to kind of run something as an initiative, because even that whole process of expectation setting can be a 5-minute discussion, right? But if you don't have the patience to even have a 5-minute discussion, then you're setting it up for failure, right? Irrespective of who the vendor is or who the thing is, because the priority at the end of the day is yours. It's not of your CFO. It's not of your head of finance. It's not of your COO. It's not anybody's, right? Like you as a founder have that responsibility to do it, which means that you need to spend that 5 minutes, because that 5 minutes can significantly save you a lot of time in terms of governing or managing how things are going out. But the other bit I think that great founders also do is how to run controlled growth experiments in perpetuity, right? So I think that's also very important. Like apart from growth experiments, it could be even just a relationship experiment. Like, is this going to work out, right? Like, okay, here's the fees. Tell me how it will work out and have a go at it, right? Because it's not going to hurt anybody. Will be a round off compared to the capital that they have raised, but it's honestly a small cost to make for a big benefit, right? But they're able to make that, and they're able to say that this is what I want out of this particular initiative, and lay that in front of you, and then say, do what you want, right? Or do what you can, right? As long as you're able to justify that this is within this parameter, you're able to achieve X amount of outcomes, and that's even internally, right? So if I'm launching an app, they have measurements on what that app should kind of do, right? Is it going to help me with better stickiness, or is it going to help me with better drip marketing, or is it going to help me to improve the quality of my lead validation process, right? Whatever it is, they have to be able to put that goal or objective very clearly defined with certain metrics that they want to hit, and that gives a direction for the entire organization to also follow suit. The other thing is how your relationship is with loss and cost, right? So founders always look, I've seen a lot of founders kind of get, and including a lot of outside people, right? The first conversation that you have would be, I think one of my posts was about that too, is that they're loss making, how are they valuable, right? Because honestly, loss is a definition that has been given in the P&L statement, right? It's not a true indicator of what the business is capable of doing or delivering. And that's a lot of it is based in the future of that business itself. So if, for example, it's a Zomato, it might be making a loss today, but the relationship that it has, the stickiness that it has, the ability to command continuous revenue and also be the largest player in a multi-trillion-dollar food industry, right, is massive, right? It's very hard to create. The moat that they have is unflinchable, right? And if you're valuing them for a small sliver of that trillion-dollar opportunity, then you see, okay, yeah, that's valuable, right? So the fact that they're making loss, because loss by itself as a word is I would say transient and also extremely subjective,
Right.
right? If you ask a founder, you're loss making as an organization, yes, but I'm making investments, right? I'm making investments into developing a new culture, developing a new habit, developing my customer profile, giving them something that they've not experienced earlier. If it requires a cost, yeah, so be it, right? But I have all the other metrics to show that how that's going to translate back into revenue over time. So I think the founders that really get it, they're not worried too much about this loss and cost concept, because they're mostly always worried about cost rather than the loss.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, one thing that you mentioned in this answer was how, it is eventually the founder's responsibility, right? But is there a case for others in the organization, the CXOs, the leaders, as time goes to become more and more financially aware about, everything that they're running? Marketing, head of marketing might want to think finance as well, and not just respond to a founder's questions about CAC, right? Is there a case for others to also become more and more financially aware and start thinking in these kind of systems?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think what you just mentioned is where kind of culture meets finance, right? So, from a culture perspective, every person within the organization, you want them to feel a sense of ownership for the outcomes that they're able to deliver. Right now, those outcomes are not necessarily defined, right, at any point of time, right? You have all of these metrics that you have to get X number of new accounts on board, but why do you have to get that account on board? What is the value of that account from an organization, right? Like all most of these guys, let's say even the marketing head kind of knows is from a stock option perspective, there are a lot of things that happen at a cap table level, and that my value of stock options is X amount, right? But that's not really the case, right? What you should be really looking at is me in terms of me adding a new account. Why is it so important for me to put in the additional effort to close a large enterprise account or to close multiple smaller accounts, right? What is that lens that you provide them with which to look within the organization? And until and unless they understand the story all the way down and all the way up, it's very difficult to get them to buy in on what you are doing as an organization, because they will just be a cog that plays a role which is limited to their current opportunity and will kill all the leadership intent that they probably have, or the leadership potential that they already have, which you may not have realized, right? And all of them to some extent have to take ownership, right? But they don't need to take ownership of the process of setting those measurements, right? Or of process of driving those numbers or those metrics. They have to be more enrolled onto what those metrics mean to the organization and why it's important today, specific to the metrics that you actually have a proper control over, which is the foundation behind OKRs, right? Like, I mean, the reason that OKRs are able to drive agile decision making in most of these startups, which have an extremely quick cycle for decisions, is because you're able to drive that concept of what you're doing and how does that relate to the overall organizational plan and organizational map, right? So I think that way, trying to be able to do that, one is to get the culture in place that everybody is feels accountable to the outcomes of the organization. Second thing is to have these metrics already placed before them so that they know what they're working towards.
Right. Yeah.
If you don't have either of them, then I mean, what's the point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, now it's getting scarier because you're actually using words that my customers are also using with me.
Okay.
So they actually, so the reason why I said that is, a Series C funded company, they actually said that we want to, sort of rework our culture because of, they have this value of ownership. And he said, I want my
Right.
people to know that ownership doesn't mean ownership of their own KPIs, but the way the founders see or define the word ownership is that whatever is best for the company is what they should be owning, and not their personal KPIs, right? So
Right.
it again boils down to that. How am I fitting into the larger picture? How am I that, what is that jigsaw puzzle and where do I fit in? If they get that whole thing and they're bought into, invested into the whole, vision, that's when they're going to do that, right? Otherwise, there
Right.
will be this worry that, oh, this is my KPI, I have to deliver on this. It doesn't matter whether it's going to, be at odds with what the company is looking for. I think it's a great, great example
Right.
that you've given here. Thanks for that. So, over the last few years of your experience, from your experience with KPMG, and now what you are doing with Prequate. So, if I were to ask you, what are the three things that you know about finance and startups that others don't? What would those three things be?
But that's way too many things. So I have to try and prioritize. Yeah. So I think one of the biggest realizations, which I also hinted at, right, is in order for something to work, in order for something to be valuable, you have to also have the operational bandwidth to be able to execute it, right? It's great if you have great advice. When I came in from the Big Four, a large part of what I thought was real about the world was that you have to be very, very good technically in order to provide great advice. But now, over the last 10, 11 years, what I've also realized is if unless and until you're able to actually work with them to execute advice and put it into action, it's very difficult to really have an lasting impact on any organization or any business. And if you're not working with impact as a lens, your relationship length with a business is always going to be short, right? And that's not going to be sustenance unless and until you have a regulatory body that imposes that you have to do this every year, or you have to do this every quarter, or you have to do this every month, right? So if you have to really kind of work well in consulting, that's one thing that you have to keep in mind is what is the impact that you've been able to deliver. I think the second thing that I would think, from startups and finance element is how closely you hold, numbers and topics and ideas to yourself is how small you will be as an organization, right? Unless and until you're able to kind of provide these numbers, ownership, accountability to people within the organization, you're not going to be able to control all the things that happen. You're not going to be able to respond in time, right? So that's a personal learning that we as an organization also had, is that we would invest so much in operational machinery, right? But today, if you look at us, we're a rhombus shaped structure, right? We're not a pyramid shaped structure. Right? Most of the people have ownership for the outcomes that they work with. Clients can perceive the difference that even at 11 o'clock somebody is responding to an email, or when they're making a pitch event, they're somebody here is observing the call. They don't need to. I mean, they don't. It's not necessary. Right. But it makes things more valuable for them as an organization that you have the buy-in continuously, right? And with an external vendor or a partner, to be able to get the same buy-in as somebody within the team itself, that's a great gift, right? If I were on the client side, I think that's the main thing that I kind of would look for from a vendor as well, as how motivated are they for the outcomes that I'm getting as an organization or a business. I think the other thing is, if you don't have ROI mindset, right, at every level, at every business level, right, at every initiative level, at every organizational level, if you don't have an ROI mindset of what you're able to add, what this decision is that you're taking in, what you expect out of it, is going to run at length with you doing a lot of inefficient or ineffective choices, which actually can be avoided completely, right? Just that you have to spend 5 more minutes on planning what you're doing and visualizing. I mean, not to use the secret kind of language, but but visualizing what you want as outcomes, right? I think that's another important learning that founders and professionals kind of need to have, is that how can you visualize objectives or results with them before you start kind of embarking on something, right? So these are the truths that I would say that founders, I mean, they probably have it in the back of their mind, but it's not something that is glaringly upfront, right? They want to think ROI, but when they get into day-to-day ops, they're like, ROI can wait. Right now I have more to do than to think.
Right. Yeah. We'll get to that, in some time is how they think. All right. So last couple of questions, and we're going to go slightly away from all that we have discussed till now. So we read your LinkedIn post about not reading newspapers, but reading extensively about business and current affairs. So how has that experience been like? Are you happy? What have you missed? Any news item that you thought you should have heard about earlier than when it reached you?
Yeah. So a lot of people kind of also ask me within the office, right? So I'm the only one who doesn't have a newspaper or doesn't touch the newspaper when he comes in. And my partner, he is a reader, like like a newspaper reader. Like he reads stuff. He has these applications which send him news. Now, I used to be that too, like maybe about 7 or 8 years back. But then I realized that, I mean, with a lot of research, that as limitless as your brain is, it's also very structured, right? Now, a lot of information doesn't necessarily mean great analysis, right? Because you're moving from one article to the other article. Most of that information is kind of just points of data which are structured into a paragraph and presented to you about a certain topic. Now, the topic probably has no relevance or has a lot of story which is going, yet to unfold or has already unfolded, right? The context of which is not available. Now, in order for you to be able to understand or to read, I spend a lot of time with alternate media, right? Which talks about analysis, which talks about why a certain piece of news is important, why a piece of information is important. Because I don't believe, we are all sitting here playing KBC, right? Nobody's going to come up and ask me, what is the capital of that country, right? And I don't need to know it either, right? That stage of you retaining information is over. Now it's about how you can process information at a certain age and certain time, is how you can process deeper views or deeper analysis, and that's going to be more critical, right? So if I see 10 news snippets of information, I might skim through all 10 but read only one article, right? But when I read that article, I read that subject matter. I don't read that specific piece of news or information. So if I find something interesting, like Tata New coming out, right? I'll read about the journey of Tata New, how they came up with the concept, what it's going to mean for the Indian consumer, rather than saying, hey, Tata New came up and X number of merchants and X number of services are all together. So I feel that we spend way too much time trying to absorb information and very little time trying to absorb analysis. And analysis will not, is not probably as efficient as consumption of more data points. But again, nobody on the street or no founder is going to ask me, did you read about that tax law that just came out, right? He's going to ask, from a foundation perspective, what is the decision that I need to make? Like, first principles, tell me what decision I need to make, right? And that's where you need to be valuable, or that's where you need to be, somebody who can add a lot more perspective than what he's already carrying. So that way, I feel it's better to read. So, for example, if I like a certain topic, for example, when Airtel changed its logo, I read a book called Biology, about the science behind logo design, because it didn't seem like a very big change, right? But if you're spending millions and millions of dollars to rebrand, there has to be a story why. Right now, when I read Biology, I started to read, okay, there is a lot more depth to how brands want to be perceived, how brands to be visualized. And when you do that, now I might not have known all the companies that changed their logo or branding, but neither does anybody else, right? Because your mind, your RAM refreshes, right? To only what is important or necessary. But if you ask me how a logo is important, or if you ask me how we, for example, like Prequate's branding is, and there I can tell you the story behind the branding, why we use certain colors, why you use certain cues within the branding, and that's more useful to the world at large than you just having the same information that everybody else has.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a very long answer to a very short question, but
no, that leads to the next question. So you mentioned a lot of alternate sources of alternate media. So what are these books, podcasts, courses, people that you follow on social media who have really influenced your thinking, and who would you recommend to our listeners?
Sure. So the most of the use of social media for me is very specific to let's say LinkedIn and the world around me, right? Like, these are people that I already know, and then I want to see what they're up to, or there's potentially a client that I would love to work with, right? And then I'm following them and then trying to understand what is happening with them. So I would say the value of social media is kind of reserved for that. But when you look at, for example, I listen to How I Built This by Guy Raz. It's a pretty popular podcast, but the real way in which a founder thinks, or the stories and the journeys, is very valuable to me. Right? You can see the pivots and why they thought through those pivots, and then you can develop a genuine appreciation for them as a business or as an organization. And another one that I listen to is Plant Money, again from NPR, which talks about some of the things that are happening in economics. Like one of the episodes that I listened to, I think 2 weeks back, is about GDP. Is GDP the real indicator that we need to be looking at, right? Or are there alternate indicators in order to measure productivity as an organization? As a country, right? That gets you to think a lot further. So that's another one that I follow. There's one more called Invisiblia, which talks about the science behind a lot of the everyday choices that we make, and also has a lot of great case studies and examples of things, and how they function and how they work. There's another one from Reid Hoffman. I think it's called Masters of Scale,
Right.
which I listen to, where he goes through a particular topic or a particular phase in a business or an organization, and how they dealt with it, and what assets did they rely on, what did they try to build, and where did how did they find out that they were going wrong, which also I find extremely valuable. So when it comes to podcasts, again, it's driving time that I spend most of the time consuming, or it's sitting in the back seat, or like when a colleague is coming to office with a colleague. So that's the time that I spend, basically the non-productive time where I can't really read a book. But apart from that, there are a number of other books. Like one of my favorite books of all time is called Nudge. I don't know if you've heard of it, by Richard Thaler. Right, beautiful book about how to construct decisions. Right, like even writing an email gets so much more refined the second you learn that choice architecture is behind most of the decisions that we make. Right, if I use a certain phraseality in a request, I'm able to get the other person to be able to make a decision about something. Right, that's very valuable, and that's not going to be useful today, or it's not going to be useful tomorrow. It's going to be useful for life. Right, or another great book is The One Small Thing, Gary Keller. Right, which shows how you can focus on the thing that matters, and scrap out all the noise, right, and get to that single point that requires fix, or get to that single leaky tap, right, in order for you to fix everything within the organization. It's a beautiful perspective, or a beautiful way to look at things, because we need to be able to declutter. Right, there's so much, especially when you work with I've probably consulted maybe more than over 200 businesses, right, like and with more than 200 businesses, and with each business being completely new, it's very easy to get just kind of embroiled with everything that's happening, right, and then your decision making becomes very clouded and very difficult the second you start thinking about everything in its totality. And when you start identifying and narrowing down on specific things that you probably need to do with an organization, then it becomes a lot more valuable, right? So I think Gary Keller's book is another important thing. And one more book is Range, which is which I believed right from the Big Four days that generalists are going to play a very, very vital role going forward, as everything else around in the world is trying to become more easier, more friendlier, become less complex, become more transparent. I think generalists are going to play a vital role, because they are the guys who can connect the dots, right? Like across the world, they're the ones who are playing. One of the key things that, for example, we as an organization, right, is our sell point, which is to a large number of our clients is visible, is T-shaped learning. Right? Like why should you work with a consultant, honestly, right? Like why don't you build these capabilities in-house, right? Have these bunch of guys spend $500,000, $1 million, get a team in-house and dedicated to work with you. But what you're not able to do is T-shaped learning, right? Which is where McKinsey, BCG, Bain, have their have their whole business model, right? Like a person with, let's say, 50 odd organizational experiences, when he comes down within an organization, he's carrying from blocks of expertise of what worked, right? Like for a business, and then trying to bring it to you for zero learning curve, right? And he's not, going to spend 2 years in order for you to get that benefit. He's coming in on day one with it, right? So you can go really deep into an organization, get the right block, and it become even better if you have 4 or 5 people with T-shaped learnings who are coming together and collaborating, and then providing you with a solution. And you're just sitting on the outside, or you hiring a team and saying, this is what you need to be doing, right? Or this is the organizational goal, figure things out, right? And then over here, you're saying that, hey, help me with profitability. And you've got 4 guys, all with their experience across 50, 60 organizations, coming in, working together, collaborating for you with a specific outcome as the answer, right? So you're digging into years and years of learning, which is available in one single place. So unless and until that kind of an approach is really there, which actually true blue generalists are able to kind of bring into an organization, it's not very, very valuable, right? Because everything, systems have kind of replaced a lot of the things that were done back then, right? Your efficiency and effectiveness at an operational level is at an all-time high. right? Now you have to concentrate completely on effectiveness, and that's where generalists try.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like the book says, right? Federer's experience in
Yeah,
playing so many different ball sports is what makes him Federer, right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right, we've come to the end of our conversation, Pradyumna, but we're going to not let you go without your hot takes on certain things. So, this is our last
Yeah.
section in all our conversations, where we ask you for what do you think is the future relevance of certain topics, right? So, the first question for you is, what do you think is the future relevance of mainstream media now that you have almost sort of sacrificed it, or you're not a user anymore? What do you think is the future relevance of mainstream media?
No, I think the role that the media used to play is always going to remain, right? But obviously, the formats in which they're going to be disseminating information has changed. They've all moved to digital. But the role is of that guy who's coming into town and then beating the drum and saying that this is the set of activities that have happened during the year. Whatever is relevant out of it, please absorb. It is going to continue. There is no way of bypassing it. The second thing is it is always going to stay relevant because the advertisers that build the industry, right, who need this circulation, are not going to want to give up that circulation to, let's say, Google or something like that, which excludes a lot of people from access, right? So that's going to be another big thing. But if you look at it, let's say 10 years in or 15 years in, digital is going to be the way the whole world operates, right? And you are going to have a lot more funded projects, like the fact that like NPR, right, one of my favorite publishing houses, is able to create content, or the way individual guys like you or guys like Vox or guys like Vice are able to create content. I think the quality of content, the quality of investigative journalism, the quality of research is only going to improve, right? Because now you have people who are viewing it who are going to be spending money rather than an advertiser who's going to be spending money, right? So which means you have millions across the world who can potentially be patrons to your content as compared to just a couple of them. So maybe 10 years in, I would find that they would be redundant, but I would say at least in the near future, the fact that there's no better distribution channel,
Right.
yeah, I think will ensure that they sustain.
Yeah. Okay. Next one is, what do you think is the future relevance of traditional startup hotspots like Bangalore, Hyderabad, Pune, Gurgaon? Is that going to, I mean, are they still going to be relevant? Is it going to go to other cities, places?
So here I have a little bit. So though the world has been talking about flattening of the thing, right? So I think it's still going to be hubs, right? For example, Bangalore is a hub, or Pune is a hub, or Hyderabad is a hub. Now between them, I think the hubs itself are going to continue because they serve as great catchment areas for talent. Now, in order for talent to come and visit and spend time, they should also have an ability or a flexibility to move from one organization to the other organization, right? Which is like, again, it's a like Ouroboros, right? So you have all the companies which are setting up in a cluster which has talent, all the talent coming because all the companies are setting up in a cluster. But what you have been seeing of late is a lot of talent which is comfortable working out of these metros, simply because there's a lot of access to technology, there's a lot of access to internet, and like Mysore is a developing hub, right? I mean, who would have thought that tier 2 city in Karnataka who can also be a technology hub, right? But it's becoming a technology hub, right? And all the hubs that are there today, I think they will continue to grow, but you might have a lot more newer hubs, but it's because the overall size of the pie is increasing rather than them replacing each other or them getting dissipated into a lot more smaller hubs.
Okay. And the final one, slightly off topic, what is the future relevance of social media influences?
So, so okay, so I think influencer, right? So that's a beautiful word, right? I mean, forget about social media. The world that we kind of live in is going to always be led by somebody saying something. Right? With social media, there are a lot more people who are providing their opinion about the recent thing about what's social media led commerce, right? Huge number of startups that are growing because now, earlier you wanted a celebrity to endorse the product. Now you want yourself to be endorsing the product. yourself as in not me as an individual, but I want somebody like me endorsing the product, right? Because I trust that somebody else is also going to be able to provide the same kind of validation that a celebrity would, because a celebrity doesn't care, right? Like, I mean, celebrity is doing it for a large format, a massive media format. So since the whole world is kind of switching to, buying things based on recommendations and experiences, a simple indicator is the amount of effect that reviews have, right, on the way you buy. So I think social media influencers will continue to kind of dictate, but their role is going to become a lot broader, because now their audiences will be engaged rather than just content, will also be engaged for commerce, right? So, I mean, earlier you would have merchandise from companies, coming in, and they would say, buy my t-shirt, support my channel. Then you had the guys like Patreon who said that, why don't you, create followership? And you have many of the other models that, obviously they're not used for completely nice users, but there are other platforms where you can pay a subscription in order to, like OnlyFans. I didn't want to say it, but like OnlyFans, right? Where you can pay a subscription to follow a particular person, right? So I think influencers is going to go down that route, because the quality of the content is going to define who really finds it relatable, and then their relevance to you is going to spread a lot deeper into what you do on a day-to-day level, apart from just consuming content. Today, that just consuming content is what is happening, right? So a lot of media and advertising agencies are kind of pumping money in, but the second you're not being paid for views anymore, I think you're going to start looking at alternate ways to monetize your followership.
Right. On that note, I think this is a fantastic, conversation, Pradyumna. I think we covered a whole range of topics, from, what a growth-focused, outsourced CFO partner is. How does it fit into the, into the realm of a founder? What value do you add? How do you do business development? We spoke about a variety of things. I think this is one of those conversations where we've done, justice to the whole topic. Yes, there was a lot of eerie moments for me, because there was there are a lot of things that you were saying which would have been completely true, for Choose to Think as well. But I think this was one of the best conversations that we had. Thanks a lot, Pradyumna.
Thanks,